This video is created for storytelling while the real names, locations, and identifying information have been changed to protect the privacy and dignity of the individuals and families involved. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. When relationships begin to break down, it rarely happens all at once. It starts with small changes, a shift in tone, a growing distance. Then come the arguments, the accusations, the sense that something isn't right anymore. In many cases, couples work through it. In others, things quietly spiral into something much darker. The Carter family looked from the outside like they had everything together. They were known as friendly, welcoming, and close, a large family with 5 children, always moving, always adapting, always trying to make the next chapter better than the last. But behind that image was a reality few people truly understood. And by the time the truth came out, it was almost too late. Emily Carter was born on March 3, 1981, in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. She grew up in a modest home, raised by parents who valued stability and hard work. Emily was known for her patience and warmth. She was the kind of person who avoided conflict and tried to see the good in people even when it wasn't obvious. At 16, she met Daniel Carter. He was a couple of years older, confident, outgoing, and easy to talk to. They attended the same high school and shared mutual friends, often running into each other at gatherings or after-school events. Their connection started casually but grew stronger over time. They didn't rush into a relationship. For a while, they were just friends. But by the time Emily was 18, they had grown close enough to start dating. To everyone around them, they seemed like a perfect match. They were social, energetic, and deeply attached to each other. Friends admired their bond. Their families approved. It felt like a relationship that would last. In 2002, they got married. Emily was 21, Daniel was 23. They settled into a small home and began building a life together almost immediately. A year later, their first child, Ava, was born. Over the next several years, the family grew quickly. 4 more children followed: Mason, Chloe, Ethan, and Noah. Emily chose to stay home and raise the kids. It wasn't an easy job, but she took it seriously. She managed the household, homeschooled the children at times, and tried to create a stable environment despite constant change, because stability was something they struggled to maintain. Daniel was ambitious but inconsistent. He wanted to succeed badly, but he struggled to stick with one path. Over the years, he tried different business ventures: landscaping, property flipping, equipment rentals, seasonal sales. Each time he started with enthusiasm, convinced it would work, and each time it fell apart. The failures began to stack up. With every new attempt came more financial strain. Debt increased, credit worsened. The family moved frequently, chasing new opportunities in different states: Ohio to Georgia, Georgia to Mississippi, Mississippi to Florida. Every move came with the same promise: this time it'll work. Emily believed him. She stood by him through every setback, offering support, encouragement, and patience. No matter how difficult things became, she stayed committed to the idea that things would eventually improve. From the outside, the Carters still looked like a tight-knit family. They made friends easily in new places. Their home was always open to visitors. Emily cooked, hosted, and kept things running. Daniel talked about his plans, confident and persuasive, drawing people in. But inside the house, the pressure was building. By 2014, the constant instability had started affecting the children. They struggled to adjust to new schools. They couldn't maintain friendships. The frequent relocations left them unsettled. To solve this, Emily and Daniel decided to homeschool them. At first, it seemed like a practical solution. In reality, it isolated them further. Ava, the eldest, became a second caretaker. She helped manage the younger kids, assisted Emily, and took on responsibilities far beyond her age. She was especially close to her father. Daniel relied on that. Over time, something in him began to change. The stress of repeated failure, combined with financial pressure, started to affect his behavior. He became more anxious, more irritable, and eventually more controlling. It started small. Questions about where Emily was going, who she was talking to, why she took longer than expected to run errands. At first, Emily brushed it off, but the questions became accusations. Daniel began to suspect she was being unfaithful. There was no evidence, no reason for it, but the idea took hold in his mind and refused to let go. Soon, suspicion turned into control. He asked her to delete her social media accounts. Then he insisted she stop talking to certain people. Eventually, he began checking her phone regularly, reading messages, monitoring calls. Emily tried to keep the peace. She didn't argue, she complied, hoping it would calm things down. It didn't. Daniel's behavior escalated. He began dictating what she wore, criticizing outfits he considered inappropriate, even when they were ordinary. Over time, he insisted on choosing her clothes himself. Makeup was no longer allowed, jewelry was limited to her wedding ring. Then came the isolation. Daniel restricted her ability to leave the house. At first, it was subtle, discouraging outings, questioning her reasons. Eventually, it became direct. He took her phone, limited her access to transportation, locked doors when he left. Emily and the younger children were often left inside, unable to go anywhere. The only exception was Ava. Daniel allowed her to come and go freely. He brought her along on errands, spent time with her, and slowly began to shape how she saw the situation. He told her he was protecting the family, that everything he did was necessary, that her mother didn't understand what was at stake. Ava believed him. Inside the house, Emily's situation became increasingly difficult. Daniel criticized her constantly, blamed her for his failures, accused her of things she hadn't done. At times, his behavior turned physical, brief, controlled, just enough to intimidate, never enough to leave clear evidence. But the psychological pressure was constant. After nearly 15 years of marriage, Emily reached her limit. She told Daniel she wanted a divorce. The reaction was immediate. He lashed out, angry, dismissive, and threatening. He told her she wouldn't survive on her own, that no one would want her, that she was making a mistake she couldn't undo. From that point on, the situation inside the house became even more restrictive. Around the same time, Daniel became involved in a financial investigation related to his business activities. For a period, he was confined to the home under legal supervision. For Emily, it made everything worse. There was no space, no break, no escape. Weeks passed like this. Then, one afternoon, an opportunity appeared. Daniel left the house for a short time. Emily found a phone. It was the first real chance she had to reach out. She called emergency services. Her voice was rushed, urgent. She explained that she had been kept inside, that she wasn't safe. The call ended abruptly when Daniel returned, but it was enough. Authorities had the address. They responded immediately. When officers arrived, Daniel tried to control the situation. He downplayed everything, claimed there was no problem, that Emily was exaggerating, but under pressure, he allowed them to leave. Emily didn't wait. She took the children and left with nothing. No belongings, no savings, no plan, just the need to get out. With help from local support services, she found temporary shelter, food, clothing, a place to stay. It wasn't much, but it was safe. Within weeks, she found a job, then a small home. Slowly, life began to stabilize. She filed for a divorce. At first, Daniel tried to contact her repeatedly, asking her to come back. But over time, he seemed to step back. His tone softened, his persistence faded. It gave Emily a sense of relief. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. 6 months later, she began to rebuild her personal life. She met someone new, a man named Ryan Blake. What started as a friendship gradually turned into something more. It was steady, respectful, and nothing like what she had experienced before. The divorce moved forward. A custody agreement was reached. The children would live primarily with Emily. Daniel would have scheduled visits, including weekends. On the surface, everything seemed to be settling into place. Daniel appeared calm, cooperative, changed. Emily wanted to believe it. She needed to believe it. But what she didn't realize was that Daniel hadn't let go. Not of her, not of the family, and not of the idea that everything still belonged to him.
The investigation moved quickly after Emily's rescue, but proving what had happened inside Daniel's mind was far more difficult than documenting what he had done. At first glance, the case seemed strong. There was the eyewitness from the gas station, the physical evidence recovered from the car, and Emily's detailed statement. But Daniel's defense team wasted no time constructing an alternative narrative. They argued that the entire situation had been exaggerated, that Emily had willingly gone with him, and that what occurred between them was part of a complicated, consensual dynamic rooted in their failing relationship. Without clear, undeniable evidence of intent, the case risked becoming a battle of interpretations. Daniel leaned heavily into that uncertainty. During questioning, he remained calm, almost rehearsed. He described himself as a desperate husband trying to save his family, someone pushed to the brink by betrayal. He claimed Emily had been emotionally unstable, that she had initiated many of their interactions, and that even the restraints and threats had been part of something they both understood. To outsiders, the story sounded absurd, but in a courtroom, doubt is powerful. Meanwhile, Emily faced a different kind of challenge. Recovering physically was only part of it. The psychological weight of what she had endured lingered in ways that were harder to articulate. She had spent years minimizing Daniel's behavior, convincing herself that things would improve, that his control came from stress, not cruelty. Now she had to confront the reality that it had escalated into something far more dangerous than she had ever admitted. Still, she stayed focused. Her priority was her children. They had been placed temporarily under supervised care while the investigation unfolded, and interviews with them revealed something deeply unsettling. None of them initially described their father as dangerous. In fact, most spoke with him with affection. They remembered family trips, shared meals, and moments that felt normal. It was only when investigators asked more specific questions that the cracks began to show. Restrictions, rules, surveillance. Small details that, when put together, painted a picture of control so constant that it had become invisible to them. The eldest, Sophie, struggled the most. She had been closest to Daniel, trusted him without question, and unknowingly played a role in the events that led to Emily's abduction. Realizing that truth weighed heavily on her. She became withdrawn during interviews, often second-guessing her own memories, unsure of what was right or wrong. Emily made a deliberate choice not to blame her. Instead, she reassured Sophie that none of it was her fault, that manipulation can feel like love when it's all you've known. That understanding became an important part of the healing process for all of them. As the months passed, the legal process slowed. Delays piled up, motions were filed, hearings were postponed. By early 2020, the trial was finally approaching, but then the global pandemic disrupted everything. Court schedules were pushed back indefinitely, and Daniel remained in custody while the case sat in limbo. For Emily, the waiting was exhausting, but life gradually began to stabilize. She continued working, maintaining a steady routine for the kids. They moved into a small home in a quiet neighborhood, far from the constant tension that had once defined their lives. The sense of normalcy was fragile, but it was real. During that time, Ethan Carter became a constant presence. What had started as support slowly grew into something deeper. He never pushed, never tried to replace anything, but he was there in ways that mattered, helping with the children, showing up when needed, and giving Emily space to rebuild her sense of control. Over time, she allowed herself to trust again. By 2021, they were married. For the first time in years, Emily felt like she was building something stable, something that wasn't defined by fear. But the past hadn't disappeared, it was waiting in court. When the trial finally began in the spring of 2022, it drew significant attention. The details were disturbing, but what made the case especially complex was the psychological dimension. This wasn't a sudden act of violence. It was the culmination of years of control, manipulation, and escalation. The prosecution focused on that pattern. They presented a timeline that showed how Daniel's behavior had evolved from jealousy to restriction, from restriction to isolation, from isolation to violence. Each step was supported by testimony, records, and evidence collected over time. Emily took the stand and described everything, not just the final incident, but the years leading up to it, the gradual loss of freedom, the fear, the way reality had been reshaped inside their home. Her testimony was steady, clear, detailed, unshaken. The defense tried to challenge her credibility, suggesting inconsistencies, questioning her decisions, pointing out the lack of visible injuries in earlier incidents, but the overall pattern was difficult to ignore. Then came the physical evidence, the cord, the razor blade, the handwritten notes recovered from Daniel's vehicle, multiple drafts of what appeared to be farewell messages, each one describing a version of events that ended with both of them dead. That detail shifted the tone of the trial. This was no longer about a domestic dispute, it was about intent. Still, one element made the case even stronger than expected: the testimony of the children. One by one, they described what they had seen that night, the instructions, the secrecy, the fear. Even though they hadn't witnessed everything, their accounts aligned in ways that reinforced Emily's version of events. For Sophie, it was the hardest, but her testimony became one of the most impactful. She explained how she had believed her father, how she thought she was helping bring the family back together. And then, quietly, she admitted that she now understood what had really happened. That moment resonated in the courtroom. It revealed not just the crime, but the manipulation behind it. By the time closing arguments began, the narrative was clear. The prosecution argued that Daniel had planned everything, that he had used his children as tools, created an opportunity, and acted with the intention of controlling Emily completely, even if it meant ending her life. The defense maintained their position, insisting that the situation had been misunderstood, that emotions had been misinterpreted, and that there was still reasonable doubt. The decision now rested with the jury, and the outcome would determine whether Daniel Walker would ever walk free again.
The jury deliberated for just under 2 days. Inside the courtroom, the tension was steady, almost quiet. There was no dramatic buildup, no visible emotion from Daniel as he sat beside his attorneys. He maintained the same controlled expression he had carried throughout the trial, as if the outcome were simply another variable he had already accounted for. Emily sat across the room, hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't look at him. When the jury finally returned, every seat in the courtroom was filled. Even the smallest movement seemed amplified. The foreperson stood, holding the verdict form. Guilty, on all counts. The words landed with finality. No hesitation, no ambiguity. The months of testimony, the years of fear, the long delay through the pandemic, all of it collapsed into that single moment. Daniel's expression didn't change immediately, but for the first time there was a subtle shift. Not shock exactly, but something closer to realization. The version of reality he had constructed, defended, and repeated was no longer holding. Emily exhaled, almost involuntarily. It wasn't relief in the way people often expect. It was quieter than that. a release of tension she had carried for years, not just since the night of the abduction, but long before that, through every moment she had been told to doubt herself. The sentencing phase followed shortly after. The prosecution didn't hold back. They emphasized the calculated nature of Daniel's actions, the use of his own children to facilitate the crime, and the clear evidence of premeditation shown through the notes found in his car. This wasn't impulsive, they argued. It was deliberate, structured, and escalating. The defense asked for leniency. They spoke about stress, financial pressure, emotional instability. They tried to reframe Daniel not as a calculated offender, but as someone who had lost control under extreme circumstances. But the court had already seen the pattern. When the judge delivered the sentence, it was direct. 3 consecutive life terms with no possibility of parole. A definitive end to any chance of release. Daniel showed little reaction as he was escorted out. No outburst, no final statement, just silence. For Emily, the legal battle was over. But rebuilding a life doesn't end with a verdict. In the months that followed, the focus shifted entirely to recovery, not just hers, but her children's as well. Each of them processed what happened in different ways, some with anger, others with confusion, and some with a kind of quiet withdrawal that took time to understand. Therapy became a constant, so did patience. Emily made it a point to create stability where she could. Regular routines, open conversations, a home environment where questions were allowed, where nothing had to be hidden or minimized anymore. Sophie especially carried a heavy burden. Understanding her role in that night didn't come all at once. It surfaced in pieces, often accompanied by guilt. But over time, with support, she began to see the situation more clearly. She had been manipulated, not responsible. That distinction mattered. It didn't erase what happened, but it allowed her to move forward. Ethan remained steady through all of it. He never tried to replace the past or force healing to happen faster than it could. Instead, he focused on consistency, showing up, being present, offering support without pressure. Over time, that consistency helped to rebuild a sense of trust that had been deeply damaged. Life gradually became less about survival and more about living. There were still difficult moments, anniversaries, unexpected reminders, but they no longer defined everything. The case itself didn't fade from public attention quickly. It became a reference point in discussions about coercive control and domestic abuse, not because it was the most extreme example, but because it showed how easily long-term manipulation can be overlooked, even by those living inside it. From the outside, the signs were subtle: a controlling partner, frequent relocations, isolation from others. Individually, none of it triggered immediate alarm, but together, over time, it created an environment where one person held complete control over another's life. That was the part many people struggled to understand. Why didn't she leave sooner? Why didn't anyone notice? The answers weren't simple. Control rarely begins with something obvious. It builds gradually, often disguised as concern, protection, or necessity. By the time it becomes dangerous, the person experiencing it may already be isolated, dependent, or unsure of their own perception. Emily's case highlighted that progression. It also showed something else: that leaving, even late, still matters. That survival, even after years of control, is possible. Years later, Emily would occasionally revisit the case, not in detail, but in reflection, not to relive it, but to measure how far things had come. The house felt different now, lighter, quieter in a way that didn't feel tense. The children had grown, each finding their own path, carrying pieces of the past, but no longer defined by it. There was no clean ending to what happened, no moment where everything simply reset, but there was distance, and with distance came clarity. The story of what happened to Emily Walker wasn't just about a single night or a single crime. It was about the slow build of control, the breaking point, and the long process of taking that control back. And in the end, that was the part that mattered most.
In June 2016, in a quiet stretch of woodland just outside the town of Redvale in western India, a farmer made a discovery that would linger unanswered for years. He had been clearing dry branches for fuel when he noticed something unusual beneath a pile of leaves and loose soil. A large plastic sack, blackened and partially melted, lay hidden near a cluster of trees. As he approached, a harsh chemical odor filled the air, mixed with something far worse. He stepped back immediately and called the police. Officers from the local district arrived within the hour. When they opened the bag, they found human remains, severely burned, almost unrecognizable. The fire had destroyed most identifying features. There were no clothes left, no personal items, nothing that could point to who this person had been. Only fragments remained intact, portions of the skull, parts of the pelvis, and a few long bones. The site told its own story. There were traces of fuel in the soil. The burn pattern suggested the fire had been deliberately set and controlled. Whoever had brought the body there hadn't acted in panic. This was calculated, planned, an attempt to erase someone completely. The remains were sent to a forensic laboratory in a nearby city. Specialists ran every test available at the time: dental comparisons, bone analysis, DNA sampling. Nothing matched. No missing persons report aligned with the estimated age, time frame, or profile. No family came forward, no leads surfaced. Within weeks, the case stalled. Without an identity, there was no starting point. Without a starting point, there was nowhere to go. Eventually, the file was archived. The unknown victim remained exactly that, unknown. Hundreds of miles away, in a completely different world, the story had already begun years earlier. Ria Sen was born in 1989 in a crowded neighborhood in the northeastern city of Larkspur. Her early life was unstable from the start. Her parents, Kavita Sen and Arvind Rao, had a volatile relationship that didn't survive long after her birth. When Ria was still a toddler, her younger brother, Neil, was born. Shortly after that, everything fell apart. Arvind disappeared from their lives entirely. No contact, no support, nothing. Kavita, overwhelmed and unwilling to take on full responsibility, made a decision that would shape everything that followed. She left both children in the care of her parents and moved away to pursue her own ambitions. To Ria and Neil, it wasn't explained as abandonment. They were told their mother had important work, that she would return one day. But she didn't. Years passed without calls, without letters, without any sign that she intended to come back. Their grandparents raised them as best they could. It wasn't an easy life. Money was limited, opportunities were scarce, but they had stability, and they had each other. As Ria grew older, she began to understand what had really happened. Her mother hadn't been forced to leave. She had chosen to. Meanwhile, Kavita was building a completely different life. After relocating to the city of Easton, she enrolled in university, then quickly moved into business circles. She was ambitious, calculated, and determined to reinvent herself. She married Raj Malhotra. The relationship gave her access to resources and connections she had never had before. Together, they launched a small company that gradually expanded. That marriage didn't last long. After a few years, they divorced, though Kavita retained financial footing and business experience. Then came the turning point. She moved again, this time to Metro City, the country's financial hub.
It was a place where image mattered as much as success, where reputation could open doors or close them instantly. There, she met Vikram Malhotra, a high-profile executive in the media industry. They married soon after. With Vikram came status, influence, access to elite circles where appearances were carefully curated and personal histories were often edited to fit a narrative. Kavita understood that better than anyone, so she erased her past completely. In her new life, there were no abandoned children, no small-town struggles, no complicated history, only success, only control. For years, Ria and Neil remained in Larkspur, growing up with their grandparents. By the time Ria turned 19, the reality of her situation became impossible to ignore. Her grandparents were aging, money was tight, her brother needed medical care they struggled to afford. She had to make a decision. On her birthday, after weeks of tracking, she managed to track down a phone number connected to her mother. She called. The conversation was polite, distant. Kavita didn't apologize. She didn't explain her absence. Instead, she spoke about her life now, her career, her marriage, her position in Metro City. It was as if the past had never existed. Still, Ria held on to the possibility that this could be a beginning. She asked if they could reconnect. At first, Kavita hesitated. Then she made an offer. Ria could come to Metro City, she could study there, build a future, have opportunities she never had before. But there was a condition. No one could know who she really was. In Kavita's world, Ria would not be her daughter. She would be introduced as her younger sister. No exceptions, no discussions. The truth would remain hidden. It was an impossible condition, and yet Ria accepted it. The alternative was staying behind in a life with limited options, watching her family struggle without any way to help. She chose the opportunity, even if it meant giving up her identity. Metro City was everything Ria had imagined and more, fast-paced, overwhelming, full of possibilities. Kavita arranged for her to enroll in a university and provided basic support, but the relationship between them remained distant, cold. Every interaction followed strict boundaries. The sister narrative had to be maintained at all times. No slips, no emotional conversations, no mention of the past. Ria adapted, at least on the surface. Inside, the conflict never fully settled. She was living closer to her mother than she had in years, yet felt further away than ever. That's when she met Arav. He was Vikram's son from a previous relationship, around the same age as Ria, studying in a similar field, navigating his own complicated family dynamics. They connected quickly. What started as casual conversations turned into something deeper. With him, Ria didn't have to pretend. She could be herself, at least in the ways that mattered. Over time, their relationship became romantic, and that's when everything began to unravel. Kavita noticed the change almost immediately. Her reaction was sharp, decisive. She demanded that Ria end the relationship. The reason she gave was simple. It was inappropriate. It would create complications within the family structure. But the real reason ran deeper. If the relationship continued, the truth could come out. And if that truth surfaced, everything Kavita had built could collapse. Ria refused. For the first time, she pushed back. She had already sacrificed her identity. She wasn't willing to give up everything else, too. That resistance changed the dynamic between them. What had once been distant became tense, controlled, at times hostile. Kavita attempted to separate them. She sent Ria back to Larkspur for a period, hoping distance would end the relationship. It didn't. Ria and Arav stayed in contact. If anything, the separation made their bond stronger. When she returned to Metro City, things were different. Ria had begun to rely less on her mother. Arav supported her emotionally and eventually financially. That independence weakened Kavita's control, and that made her unpredictable. On the evening of May 18, 2013, Ria agreed to meet Kavita. The invitation seemed routine: dinner, a chance to talk, maybe even fix things. Earlier that day, she had spent time with Arav. There were no signs of tension between them, no indication that anything was wrong. He dropped her off near the meeting point. She walked toward a waiting car. Inside, Kavita sat in the back seat. There was a driver and someone else Ria didn't recognize. She got in. The car drove away. Arav watched until it disappeared into traffic. At the time, nothing felt unusual. It was the last time he saw her. That night, Ria didn't come back. Her phone went silent. Hours later, Arav received a message, short, unusual, detached. She said she was fine, that she was staying with Kavita. Something felt off immediately. The tone wasn't hers. He tried calling. No answer. Then another message came, this one colder. She said she was leaving, ending their relationship, that he shouldn't contact her again. Arav stared at the screen. None of it made sense. He knew her, and this wasn't her. Not even close. By morning, he was certain of one thing. Something had gone wrong the moment she got into that car. Arav didn't wait long before taking action. By the next morning, he was already trying to reach Kavita. At first, she didn't answer his calls. When she finally did, her explanation came quickly, almost rehearsed. Ria had decided to leave. She needed space. She wanted to start fresh somewhere else. According to Kavita, the breakup message was real. Ria had asked her not to interfere and had insisted on cutting all ties. It sounded clean. Too clean. Arav pushed back. He asked where she had gone, which city, which country, any detail that could confirm the story. Kavita's answers were vague. She didn't know exactly. Ria had made the decision suddenly. It was better, she said, to respect her wishes. The conversation left Arav more unsettled than before. He went to the police that same day. Their response was immediate, but not in the way he hoped. Ria was an adult. There was no evidence of coercion, no signs of distress that could be verified. A breakup message, even an unusual one, wasn't enough to open a missing person case. They told him to wait. Give it time. People leave all the time. But Arav knew this wasn't that. He returned the next day and the day after that. Each time the answer remained the same. No case, no investigation. Days turned into weeks. Ria remained unreachable. Her phone stayed inactive, no social media activity, no contact with friends, classmates, or colleagues. It was as if she had disappeared completely. Arav began searching on his own. He visited her university, spoke to her professors, checked with her workplace. No one had seen her since that evening. He contacted her grandparents in Larkspur. They hadn't heard from her either. The concern spread quietly through the small circle of people who actually knew her, but without official recognition, it never reached beyond that. No headlines, no alerts, nothing, only silence. Over time, Arav started noticing inconsistencies, small things at first, the way the messages had been phrased, the timing, the lack of any follow-up communication. It didn't align with the person he knew. Then he found something more concrete. Old notes, personal writings Ria had kept, fragments of thoughts about her life in Metro City, about the pressure she felt, about the constant need to hide who she really was. Some entries stood out. She wrote about fear, not in dramatic terms, but in subtle, controlled language. Fear of exposure, fear of consequences if the truth came out, fear of what her mother might do to protect the life she had built. Arav read those lines over and over. They changed everything. He took the notes back to the police. This time, the conversation shifted slightly. There was still hesitation, but the tone was different. The officers acknowledged that something about the situation was unusual. Still, they needed more. Concrete evidence, not suspicion, not intuition. Arav left frustrated but not defeated. If the system wasn't going to move quickly, he would gather what it needed. For the next 2 years, he documented everything: call logs, messages, timelines. He spoke to anyone who had interacted with Rhea in the days leading up to her disappearance. He built a detailed record of her life, her routines, her relationships. He even tried to reconstruct the exact route of the car she had entered that night. But without access to surveillance data or official records, his efforts could only go so far. Still, he kept going because he was certain of one thing: Rhea had not left voluntarily. In 2016, something unexpected happened. Police in Metro City arrested a man named Ramesh Kale during a routine operation involving illegal weapons. At first, the case had nothing to do with Rhea, but during interrogation, Ramesh made an unusual claim. He said he had information about a crime from several years earlier, a crime involving a young woman. The officers pressed him for details. At first, they were skeptical. It sounded like a bargaining tactic, a way to reduce his own charges. But then he mentioned specifics: a date, a location, a name: Rhea Sen. That got their attention. Ramesh had worked as a driver, not just any driver. He had been employed by Kavita. According to his statement, he had been involved in events surrounding the night Rhea disappeared. The story he told was precise, uncomfortable in its detail. On the evening of May 18, 2013, he had been instructed to pick up Kavita and drive to a specific location in the city. Another man was already in the vehicle when he arrived. They waited. Eventually, Rhea approached and got into the car. At first, everything seemed normal. Then, during the drive, she was offered a drink. Within minutes, her behavior changed. She became disoriented, weak, then unresponsive. Ramesh said he had been told to keep driving, no questions, no stops. They left the main city and headed towards a more isolated area on the outskirts. What happened next, according to him, was deliberate, controlled, not impulsive. The vehicle stopped in a remote location. The other man held Rhea in place. Kavita acted. Ramesh didn't describe it in emotional terms. He spoke as someone recalling instructions carried out step by step. Afterwards, they placed her body into a large plastic sack, the same kind later found in the forest near Redvale. They drove deeper into the forest. At night, with no witnesses, they carried the bag away from the road. A flammable liquid was poured over it. Then it was set on fire. They stayed long enough to ensure the flames had taken hold. Then they left. The details aligned too closely to ignore. The location matched the site where unidentified remains had been found years earlier. The time frame matched Rhea's disappearance. The method matched the condition of the body. For the first time, the two cases connected. Investigators reopened the Redvale file. Forensic samples were re-examined using updated techniques. DNA testing was conducted again, this time with comparative analysis involving Rhea's biological relatives. The result came back conclusive. The remains found in the forest belonged to Rhea Sen. After years of uncertainty, her identity was finally confirmed. The case, once invisible, was now impossible to ignore. Authorities moved quickly. Kavita was arrested. So was the man identified as being present in the car. Vikram, her husband, was also taken into custody on suspicion of involvement or knowledge of the events surrounding her disappearance. For Arav, the news was overwhelming. Everything he had believed for years had been confirmed. Rhea hadn't left, she had been taken. But confirmation was only the beginning, because proving it in court would be far more complicated, and the weaknesses in the case were already becoming clear.
The arrests sent shockwaves through Metro City. For years, Kavita had carefully built an image of control, success, and respectability. Now, that image was collapsing under the weight of a single accusation that refused to stay hidden any longer. But inside the investigation room, the situation was far less certain. Because despite Ramesh's detailed confession, the case had a critical weakness. There was no direct forensic evidence linking Kavita to the act itself. The body had been burned. The crime scene had been exposed to the elements for years. Whatever physical traces once existed had either degraded or disappeared entirely. Even the vehicle used that night had long since been replaced. What remained was circumstantial, a timeline, a confession from an accomplice, and a motive. The prosecution focused heavily on that motive. They argued that Kavita had spent years constructing a new identity, one that depended entirely on secrecy. If Ria's true identity had been exposed, it could have destroyed her reputation, her marriage, and her position in elite social circles. The relationship between Ria and Arav made that risk immediate, unavoidable. According to the prosecution, the situation had reached a point where Kavita believed there was only one way to protect everything she had built: eliminate the threat. The defense countered aggressively. They attacked Ramesh's credibility first. He was already under arrest, facing serious charges. His confession, they argued, was a strategic move to reduce his own sentence. There was no guarantee he was telling the truth. They pointed out inconsistencies in his statements, small variations in timing, minor gaps in the sequence of events, enough to raise doubt. Then they addressed the lack of physical evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA linking Kavita directly to the crime itself, no eyewitnesses. They emphasized a simple argument: suspicion is not proof. The courtroom became a battleground of narratives. On one side, a story of control, fear, and calculated violence. On the other, a story of assumptions built on unreliable testimony. Arav attended every hearing. He listened as Ria's life was reduced to evidence and argument, as her final moments were debated in technical language, stripped of emotion. But one detail stayed constant: the messages. Digital forensic experts analyzed the texts sent from Ria's phone on the night she disappeared, the breakup message, the follow-up. At first glance, they appeared ordinary, but deeper analysis revealed something important. The timing between messages didn't match natural typing patterns. There were irregular pauses, inconsistent with normal conversation flow. The phrasing itself showed subtle differences from Ria's usual writing style. It wasn't definitive proof, but it suggested something critical. Those messages may not have been written freely. The prosecution used this to strengthen their argument. If the messages were staged, then the narrative of Ria leaving voluntarily began to collapse, and with it, the defense's central claim. Then came the final piece: phone location data. Though limited, it provided a rough movement pattern of Ria's device on the night she disappeared. It showed her traveling away from the city toward the same general region where her remains were later found. The defense tried to challenge its accuracy, but combined with Ramesh's confession and the forensic identification, the pattern became difficult to dismiss. After months of hearings, arguments, and cross-examinations, the case reached its conclusion. The court delivered a mixed verdict. Ramesh, the driver, was convicted. His confession, supported by corroborating details, placed him directly at the scene. His role in transporting the victim and disposing of the body was considered proven. He received a life sentence. The other accused did not face the same outcome. Kavita was acquitted. The court ruled that while there was strong suspicion, the evidence did not meet the threshold required for conviction. There was no direct proof she had committed the act beyond reasonable doubt. The same applied to the second man present in the vehicle. Vikram was also cleared due to lack of evidence connecting him to the crime. The verdict divided public opinion. Some saw it as a failure of the justice system. Others saw it as a necessary adherence to legal standards.
For Arav, it was something else entirely. It was incomplete. He stood outside the courthouse as the crowd slowly dispersed. Reporters moved on to the next story. Cameras turned away, the noise faded. But for him, nothing had ended. Ria's story had been told, partially. Her identity had been restored, but the truth, the full truth, still felt just out of reach. Years later, the case continued to be discussed in legal circles, not because it was unique in its violence, but because it exposed something deeper: the limitations of justice when evidence is lost to time, the consequences of delay, and the fragile line between suspicion and proof. Ria Sen was no longer an unidentified victim in a forgotten file. Her name was known, her story recorded, but the question that lingered was the one that couldn't be answered with certainty. Not what happened, that part was clear, but who truly carried the responsibility. In the end, the fire in the Red Veil Forest did exactly what it was meant to do. It erased just enough, and sometimes just enough is all it takes to let the truth slip through.